Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And today, we're talking. I couldn't get through that sentence without laughing. We're another Minnesota Vikings. This one might be the worst one to date. Everything we said during the pregame show was, in fact, wrong. And we're going to have to deal with that today. So we're going to go through this 40 to 23 shellacking of the Minnesota Vikings against the Atlanta Falcons in Week 6. We're going to try to find some upside, but I'm sure there's going to be far more things to be negative about on this week. So prepare yourself accordingly, and let's get her started here. So we always start our game reviews with the quarterback position, regardless of win or loss, right? Because for obvious reasons, right? I mean, the quarterback position generally is the biggest component of a victorious team. And in the Vikings case, especially yesterday, the quarterback for the team was probably the biggest proponent of why this team lost, and lost in such a way that it was like, I'm not even mad. You can hear by the tone of my voice. Like, I'm not even mad about this loss. It was just like it was such a waste of time is really what that game was for me. It wasn't that, I'm a Vikings fan, I'm a football fan. So ultimately I'm going to continue to watch these games. But yesterday's edition in particular, the way that Kirk Cousins played, the way that the team around him played in response to his poor play, was simply a waste of my time. And I'm not saying my time is valuable either, but that game was my time.
Yeah, it was bad, and I think so what we talked about last week after the Seattle game was that we thought the Vikings might be a good 1-4 team, right? Like you talk about DVOA rankings, and you talk about the strong opponents and the strong schedule they had played, and they were keeping it close against a really good Seattle team, and we're like, okay, well maybe they've turned a corner here, right? And yeah, no. So this was, I don't know what it is, but Kirk Cousins has turned into Jameis Winston this year. Like he's like hucking the ball down the field, right? Like his depth of target, I think, is way higher than the second best in the NFL, or second highest. So he's chucking it downfield, and of course the interceptions are also up. He's throwing into really tight windows at a higher rate than he usually does, and they're usually dumb decisions. So something's off with Kirk. Like obviously Kirk isn't, he's had his faults before, right?
Right.
But the decision making is clearly different to me this year, because he's usually been conservative. Like the decisions we've hated Kirk for, or I guess hated on Kirk for, have been checking down on 3rd and 12, or not getting out of the pocket when the pocket's collapsing. And he's still doing that, but now he's throwing into questionable windows way more often now, and it's resulting in those interceptions. And it's just, and they're killing the Vikings. And ultimately, this game to me is officially closed the book on any postseason hopes or any type of run down the stretch, because I just don't see how you can lose to an 0-5 Atlanta team that had been trying to lose games essentially prior to this week, and let that team come in and dominate you and your home turf.
So last week, I made the argument alongside you that the Vikings, like you said, were a good 1-4 team that through 5 games, had they had a preseason, it might be a different result. But ultimately, what we kind of came down to last week was that the record wasn't good enough to give this team a true opportunity, right? Like being 1-4 through the first 5 weeks of the year, it straight up just puts you in such a bad hole that, like, even if you are a very good team, which we thought the Vikings might be, it's difficult to climb out of that hole. So last week was the week that I closed the door on the kind of the objective outlook, right? Like looking at the record, looking at the standings, that was when I was like, all right, the Vikings are probably out of it here. And like you said, this week closed the book on this team being good. There's no more argument for that anymore, right? You get one stinker per year, and you can call that, an outlier. We already had that one, and that wasn't that long ago. Now we get a second one here, and this is the worst performance that I've seen in a really long time from this football team. It's not just Kirk. I can drown, we can, and we might, who knows. I could drown your ears off about how bad Kirk Cousins was yesterday, but it wasn't just him. Yes, the 3 picks sucked, timing of the interceptions suck. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that they basically just handed the second quarter to Atlanta. Like, Atlanta just had the ball during the second quarter. The Vikings just didn't want to have it. They just gave it away. But it was everyone else, too. Alexander Madison, 0 for 2 on the goal line, followed by Mike Boone, 0 for 1. So the running game couldn't do anything without Dalvin Cook there. Imagine if Madison scores on that drive. Game looks probably a lot different, like in theory at least. I mean, some of the complications that arise later in the game may still happen, but my point being here is that the Vikings were giving the ball to Atlanta so much, they scored 10 points every single quarter. In rhythm. They just had the ball the entire time. Younghoe Koo couldn't miss, so good for him. I mean, nothing you can really do to stop a really hot kicker like that. But this team was 0-5 coming in. We talked about this in the pregame show. This is a team with a lot of guys who are quality talent, former All-Pros, but not a whole lot left there. Most of these guys are over the hill. Julio Jones looked like he was 23 again yesterday. Matt Ryan looked like he was the MVP again. 371 on 75% completion. 4 touchdowns, no picks. Dude, like, of course it's 40 points. It should have been more.
It should have been more.
It should have been more. They did not, like, the Vikings did nothing right.
They settled for field goals a lot. And I saw the number is Mike Zimmer's, as Vikings head coach, has never allowed more than 3 30-point games in a season. And that's his third one of the season right there to Atlanta through 6 games. So he's on a pace that's going to destroy, his previous, track record in Minnesota. So like, there's so many different ways you could go with this that, I mean, there's only one positive to me, and it's Justin Jefferson. I don't know how much time I want to spend on that, but clearly he's the only positive here. Everything else is mostly just Kirk picked up his garbage time numbers. Whether you realize it or not, he threw for 343 yards and 3 touchdowns. So hopefully Kyle Shanahan paid attention to that part. But then, throwing 3 awful interceptions in your own territory. I believe all of them were in his own territory. Giving, and like we said on the pregame show, like this offense for Atlanta has playmakers, and there's good players on that offense. Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, Hayden Hurst, Todd Gurley. There's a lot of talent there, and you can't give that offense that field position that many times in a row, and then expect to come back and win the game. And so it seemed like the problems kept coming, the mistakes kept coming, and there's no discipline, there's no heart, there's no motivation, and you start to wonder, how warm is Mike Zimmer's seat?
Well, it should be pretty warm if it's not, and I think just from this game alone, we talked about kind of the Mike Zimmer factor in this game, right? How he never loses to Atlanta. And you just mentioned he never allows 30 points. Well, even more so, he never allows 40 points. This is a straw that broke the camel's back type of game, right? Like, because the things that Mike Zimmer is supposedly the best at, and I'm not going to say he's not a defensive guy now just because he's having one poor season in Minnesota. He's been a great defensive coach for many, many years in the NFL. This entire time in Minnesota, with the exception of his first year and this year, have been excellent as well. So I'm not going to just all of a sudden be like, okay, Mike Zimmer doesn't know what he's talking about. But whatever he's talking about, it's not getting through to this team right now. And I hate to be the guy because I don't know what their body language looks like. I'm not going to sit here and act like I know that he's lost the room, but something's not working. I think it's partially.
I have issue in the fact that he doesn't take accountability as well as you would hope. We talked about this before, I think, on a previous recap of a game or whatever. But, he was saying that the onside kicks stinked by Dan Bailey. Like, if Dan Bailey gets one of those or 2 of those onside kicks, the Vikings still lose that game. Like, the problem is that you have to kick an onside kick in the first place. The fact that you're down 3 possessions. The fact that your defense can't stop a nose speed.
Yeah.
Mike Zimmer. And so... And I get the personnel is different. I get that there's a lot of inexperience. The corners, Jeff Gladney, Cameron Dantzler, Harrison Hand played a lot yesterday. Like there's a lot of guys.
Can we just stop for 1 second and say that Cameron Dantzler is being asked to take on too much too soon? Like this guy was a 3rd-round pick for a reason, right?
All Gladney, Hand,
but Dantzler in particular, I think, and I've criticized him, and rightfully so, because he was out of position. He wasn't doing the right thing. He wasn't getting his head around. He wasn't executing proper technique. But all of that being said, he was just asked to cover Julio Jones in his 6th career football game. In a season where he's also been asked to cover Devontae Adams and, everyone else that's come to Minnesota's way. Cameron Dancer's been the guy to do it. You can't scapegoat a guy who's not properly prepared. That seems like it's either on Mike Zimmer for throwing him into the fire too early, something that he has to take responsibility for, or it's on Mike Zimmer for not developing him properly, which I'm not saying is the case, but it's one of those two things. It's a coaching error when a rookie is out there floundering. It's on the coach at that point for putting him in a position where he's not able to succeed. I don't think Cameron Dancer's ready yet. I think he's shown a lot of great skills, but he's shown to me that he is not ready to cover a guy like Julio Jones. He's at the best a number 2 corner right now, and unfortunately the Vikings don't have the opportunity to put someone in front of him.
See, you thought it is. It's a coaching mistake, but at the same time, part of it's roster construction. Like,
right.
If your best cornerback is a rookie 3rd rounder, and it seems like that's how they're handling things. They're handling it as if Dantzler is their best cornerback. And you picked up this guy in the 3rd round of the draft, something went wrong with the way you built your team, the way things fell apart in the offseason, and the way you rebounded from that. And so that's part of that's on Rick Spielman.
Right.
You got to blame him for a little bit of that too. So there's a lot of things compiled together, and I think I'm sure a lot of it too was there was this confidence and potentially an arrogance too, to the fact that Mike Zimmer can just build a defense with anybody, and
right.
because you kind of got that feeling with 2015, 2016, 2017, like these guys, it was a homegrown defense. A lot of guys that were drafted and some free agent signings that weren't big names, and he formed them into an elite defense, right? And it was kind of this trust that he's going to do this again, and clearly that's not the case, or something's not clicking, or whatever the case may be. But and the funny thing is, I spent a lot of time talking last time. Falcons. Mike Zimmer has dominated the Atlanta Falcons prior to this game. The last 3 times he's played them, he's allowed 10, 9, and 12 points to the Atlanta Falcons. And then Matt Ryan comes in this game and has absolutely no problems torching this team. So things are upside down in Minnesota right now. It really seems like Mike Zimmer's tenure is coming to a close. I don't know how the contract looks in terms of, because he was just extended. I don't know how that looks with if he can be fired, or how the money works, or I don't even know how that works. But it seems like his seat is very hot, and I don't even know who would be the interim coach, because Gary Kubiak has made it known that he doesn't want to be a head coach anymore. Do you go with another defensive guy like Andre Patterson? I think that's the whole point, is to go away from the defensive thing.
Right.
So it just seems like there's no like backup plan for this team, even though clearly the roster is rebuilding. And there's just, I think I saw this analogy on Twitter from Matthew Collar. He does, I think it's, what is it, Purple Insider is his web platform that he does. And he said the Vikings had, or in the offseason, they had a fork in the road. They had 2 paths they could choose, and they instead of going right or left, they went straight. And that has caused all kinds of problems for the Vikings, because they kind of rebuild, but they kind of went in the win now mode, and it has resulted in the Vikings really being lost, and there's nowhere to go because they're stuck with Kirk. They're in that awful contract unless they go Brock Osweiler. So there's no answer, and that's the worst part. That's the worst part about this, is that we're comparing Kirk Cousins to Brock Osweiler right now. That's where we're at.
Okay, so all of that being said, right? Before we get into the positives here, because there are a couple. I mean, Jefferson's a positive, and I think we can find a couple other ones here. I need to ask this question, and it might be a little bit overdue at this point, but it's definitely a real question now. Like there's enough objective evidence that even the most irrational, optimistic Vikings fan might be asking themselves this question. And it's this: is it time to start over? And I think it's a very fair time to ask. You're 1-5. It's basically draft season in Minnesota right now. Okay. I am under the impression that it's draft season in Minnesota as of October 19th? Yeah. Okay. You have an opportunity starting next April to rehaul this team. You have some changes already coming into place. You got Michael Pierce coming back to fix your interior defensive line. You got Danielle Hunter probably coming injury. That's a piece you don't have right now. Anthony Barr, same deal. You've got the opportunity to figure out what you're going to do with Yannick Ngakoue. You might be able to trade that contract before November 3rd or whatever that deadline is. Maybe get another pick back from a team that's really ready to contend here. Or you can move forward with this guy. One problem, and we've highlighted this numerous times, is that Kirk Cousins' contract is basically immovable. Unless, some team finds something really creative that I don't know anything about because I'm not enough of a salary cap expert. He's not going anywhere. But you can still start that. You can start that transition, kind of like Green Bay did last year at a kind of a weird time. The Vikings can do that same thing, right? They can move forward with a guy like Justin Fields. I mean, I'm not saying I know Trevor Lawrence is the obvious candidate here, but Trey Lance and Justin Fields are probably more realistic. I don't think the Vikings are bad enough to be, the worst team in the NFL record-wise and strength of schedule-wise. So, this is considered. You got Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman recently extended, but you can get out of that, or the owners, the Wilfs, of course, have enough. I don't want to talk about their wallet, but I certainly feel comfortable saying that they have enough money to pay two coaches at the same time if they really feel that Mike Zimmer isn't right for the job. So I implore to you then, is it time to start over? Are Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer not the right guys to get this team out of this hole?
It depends on what you mean by start over. If you mean start over simply at the quarterback position, I think it is. And if that means eating Kirk Cousins' salary and, drafting a guy and then just having Kirk Cousins be a $35 million backup, then so be it. If you're talking to complete roster overhaul where you go Miami Dolphins on it and anybody worth the value you trade, I'm not really on board with that. So that would mean, you trade Anthony Harris, you trade Eric Kendricks, you trade Harrison Smith, you trade Danielle Hunter, you trade all of these guys in order to completely start over from scratch with nothing of value besides some borderline rosterable players. And so I'm not quite on board with that because I think there's enough talent. And then there's also a bunch of young corners that while they're, being asked to do a ton right now, and there's certainly a lot that needs to be developed there, but there's enough talent, I think, that this could be a good roster if you kind of focus some attention on, the interior defensive line. You get a piece next to Michael Pierce there. You get your quarterback of the future, or at least try to, right? I think there's the potential is there. And so I think it's time to start over at quarterback. And the problem, though, with that is that you can't even do it until after the season because, Sean Mannion's your backup right now.
Again, so ridiculous.
You can't. Yes. That's the worst part about this, I think, right now, is that, most teams, when they get in a situation like the Vikings right now, they can try some other young backup quarterback, see if he's worth anything, see if he can, has the potential, and maybe run with him next year. It's not like that with Sean Mannion. The other guy, Nate Stanley, maybe that's your guy. So there's just mismanaging the backup quarterback scenario has also kind of left the Vikings hanging here. And, basically this is the worst possible scenario with what the Vikings did this offseason.
Yeah.
They didn't pick rebuild. They didn't pick retool and kind of stay contenders. They did whatever's in the middle of that. And the risk you have with that is if things go wrong early on in the season, you have no other plan, no strategy involved as to how you can fix it. So you got Kirk for, I think they owe him $50-some million after this year even, combined for the next 2 years. So I don't know. I have no idea what to think. I just know it's going to be a while before the Vikings are competitive.
I think it's fair. I think it's fair to start over. So you've got
we're talking over unload some contracts, try to get rid of Riley Reef or Kyle Rudolph.
When I say start over
or the trade deadline,
I'm focusing mostly on the quarterback position, the coaching staff, the general manager, that type of thing. I'm kind of with you. I think the roster, when healthy, has 2 or 3 blue chip players. You look at Harrison Smith, Danielle Hunter, Eric Kendricks is probably your 3 main blue chip guys. You've also got Dalvin Cook, who's a blue chip but also a running back. You've got some other nice young pieces. You just drafted Justin Jefferson, obviously, who's a highlight from this game and really this entire season. Jeff Gladney, Cameron Dancer could develop into nice players. Michael Pierce is paid like a blue chip nose tackle for sure. I guess it remains to be seen what he looks like in this system. Anthony Barr is also a really nice player. You've got talent on your roster. if you get an influx of draft picks, which coincidentally the Vikings also have because Rick Spielman loves his draft picks, you don't necessarily need a full facelift on the roster, but you might need to change the direction in which this roster is going, right? Like, what are you going to do with those draft picks? Those are questions we have every single year. But like, if you bring in an offensive mind, for example, if you fire Mike Zimmer, if you move away from that era and bring in an offensive guy, you have a whole different perspective on what to do with those picks and the roster construction element of it. If you're pissed about the backup quarterback being Mannion, like I am, and you like are it open to the idea of moving on from Kirk Cousins, well, maybe Rick Spielman's on the hot seat as well, because you're right. He didn't do enough at the quarterback position this year. Jake Browning and Nate Stanley as your backups, or your quote, take a look for the future guys. Yeah. That's not going to do it. And Sean Mannion, Courtney Cronin asked this question. I feel like I've asked this question a million times, but she asked it yesterday, and I think everyone gave her a resounding, obvious answer. If Sean Mannion isn't going to play, what's the point of rostering him? Make him a damn coach. I don't get it. It blows my mind. Like, if he's not capable of playing, if there's no reason to play him, make him a coach. If he's going to hold a clipboard, pay him like a coach. He doesn't even count towards your contracts then. Just do it. It's ridiculous.
Well, and so like look at the Eagles, right? Like where the Eagles are at right now. Their team, they've had a really rough start, right? Really rough start, and they don't look competitive. They're at I guess they're at the same level as the Vikings right now. But they spent, a second-round pick on Jalen Hurts. And so, and Wentz has been, and they've had injuries, and I understand that. But they have that option to take a look at Jalen Hurts if something happens, Now, I don't want the Vikings to ever get to the level of the Packers here, where they reached clearly for Jordan Love, traded picks to get up this guy that, when you have a guy like Rodgers who's pretty stable there, it doesn't look like he's going to be playing. But use the second or third round pick on a quarterback every 2-3 years. That's how Seattle will end up with Russell Wilson. I mean, and the fact that they haven't done that very well at all. They have Sean Mannion as a backup and Nate Stanley. They have Jake. There's no, because I feel like they almost did this to leverage themselves into Kirk by thinking like, well, if there's not the threat from the public to bench Kirk, then we're fine.
I feel that same way. I think Kirk was in on that. I feel like it's
possible.
I think he's so soft mentally that he was part of the reason why the roster is constructed this way. And that's why, you can't put all your eggs in one basket, especially in football, right? It's a 53-man roster. Yes, I know that the quarterback position accounts for probably like a good team, probably accounts for like 50% plus of the success of that organization. Hey, I get it. But especially with a guy like Kirk Cousins, you're really going to put all your eggs in that basket? That's the one? A guy that throws those eggs against the wall and smashes them? Like, Rick Spielman is to blame here too. It's not just Mike Zimmer. If you're going to get rid of one of them, you got to get rid of both, in my opinion, because they're so linked in their philosophy as well. And I like Rick Spielman. Hell, I like Mike Zimmer too. But I'm on board at this point with the idea that it might be time to just move in a different direction. And I don't think that Mike Zimmer is capable of going in a different direction. He is who he is. And this philosophy might work with another team. Hell, he might go down to Dallas and win a Super Bowl next year. It could happen. It would piss all of us off, but it could happen. But I don't think his shtick is going to get it done in Minnesota. I'm nervous about that now. I don't see a future.
If you truly have your generational elite quarterback, and the guy is like, it's not a Kirk Cousins like, oh, he might be top 10 material. And I think for what it's worth, Kirk was pretty solid last year, right? We know where things are scripted right and it goes according to plan, that he can sit in the pocket and throw absolute darts. We know that about Kirk.
Right.
But this year, things have not gone as planned around him. And that's when you need your quarterback to improvise and save the team like the elite ones do. He can't do that. He has not a shred of that instinct or trait in his body. And so that's where the Vikings are falling apart. And I think, Jordan Reed says this over and over on Twitter. Our guy, Jordan Reed, he says, Kirk was meant to be the final piece to the puzzle to the Vikings defense in 2017 that was elite, that carried that team to the NFC Championship and had one game away from a Super Bowl. That defense is not there anymore. The surrounding cast that Kirk was, thought he was going to have is not there anymore. And so now that becomes on him to carry that load and carry this team to wins. And he just doesn't have that in him. And so it's almost wrong. It's wrong of us to expect that from him. That's never been who he is. And of course, out of a franchise quarterback, you want somebody that can carry your team. And that's why I think it's going to be, it's about time to switch directions there. But of course, the unfortunate part of that is the Vikings are stuck with Kirk until 2022, unless some team is dumb enough to trade for him.
So the only thing is with that, specifically with Kirk, is that you could turn him into a bridge quarterback, right? You could pay him franchise quarterback money to be a placeholder next year for a Trey Lance, for example, a guy that a lot of experts believe to be, very gifted in his tools, needs a little bit of help to round off, fine tune some things, if you will. So you do have that type of opportunity if you do want to go quarterback. But I do think like Kirk Cousins is part of the problem, and he was definitely in my opinion, the biggest problem yesterday. But like you look at this team moving forward now, right? Like you look at the things that went well yesterday for Minnesota. Justin Jefferson, Irv Smith both had outstanding performances. You got some nice moments from Cameron Dantzler. A couple of those tackles were really, really nice.
Yeah.
For what it's worth. Like he struggled in coverage, but a couple of those moments were really nice. Eric Kendricks continues to be one of the best in the league at what he does best. And Eric Wilson continues to be kind of in the right place at the right time, which for what it's worth, I know he's had a up and down career in Minnesota. He always seems to be in the right place at the right time. So you've got some positives. You've got, some things to move forward with here that you can kind of try to develop. The question that enters my mind now is just that, are you even developing the right things? Like, are you focusing your efforts on the right players? Is this right system in place defensively for this unit to work? Did Rick Spielman compile the right players to work within this system? I mean, we see it all the time. I think my favorite example is when Nnamdi Asomugha went from being an absolute stud shutdown corner in Oakland, goes to Philadelphia, and his career is over in a year and a half. Did Rick Spielman bring in guys that make sense in a press coverage scheme? I know the Vikings scouting department is in terms of figuring out, well, do they think this can happen? But did Rick Spielman make the right call with guys like Cameron Dantzler and Jeff Gladney? It seems like those two picks should have been swapped, by the way, based on their usage so far and kind of where they're at fundamentally. Did the Vikings make a bunch of bad calls last year leading up to this season to put them into this position? And I think you've elaborated on that thoroughly so far, that I like the fork in the road example, because that's what they did. It's true. They thought they were better than they are. We are not who we thought we were. That's the situation that Minnesota is in right now. And that's ultimately comes to Rick Spielman. It's on him. And you do have a guy, by the way, that sits in the office in George Payton, who has been waiting for a general manager opportunity, who will have some of the philosophies and some of kind of the acumen that Rick Spielman uses when kind of going about his business and football operations with a whole different style, right? And doesn't that sound good right now? Especially because he is fully aware of kind of the biggest issues and kind of the problems that, like us as fans, we not be as smart as the people in that building, but we sure offer a lot of ideas, don't we? And he's definitely aware of all of our ideas because he's been here. Yeah. He sat in Minnesota. He read the newspapers. And so you look at that, like George Payton, fire Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer. This is completely throwing this out of the hat. No idea where I'm going with this. Fire Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer. You get Payton in there as your general manager, bring in some of the things that are good, fix some of the stuff that's bad, and hire an offensive mind. Eric Bieniemy is the obvious candidate right now. You also have your guy in Tennessee, Arthur
Smith.
So there's plenty of good candidates. The Vikings have an opportunity here to make this shift. The question just becomes, is it time to do it? And I think it might be a little bit dramatic to say it after this game because I need to see one more game to make sure that I'm kind of right. Like, this is truly what the Vikings are. But I think the answer to that question is yes, it is time to start over. It is.
Well, it's just like they can't, like, you can't show up that badly week 2 and week 6 and be a good team. Like, there's like good teams don't do that twice matter of 5 weeks, where they put
It's
up like what
separate
happened against the Colts.
separate periods too, right? Like the first 4 weeks was quote the preseason, and now we're in the real campaign, and you're still shitting the bed the same way.
Yeah. So I'm with you on the start over. I don't hate your ideas of George Payton and if it's Arthur Smith, if it's Eric Bieniemy, or whoever else would want to take this job right now because you have no financial cap flexibility whatsoever. But I saw something today on Twitter as well. Now I know I'm on Twitter way too much, and that's where like half the things I say in here are like, oh, I saw this on Twitter. But Darren Wolfson was replying to somebody and said like, you think about the Vikings playoff win against the Saints, and you look back at that and wonder how much that changed the offseason because,
right.
Is Kirk extended? Is Kirk extended without that win? Is Mike Zimmer extended without that win? Remember, right before that week, there was the rumors about, should Mike Zimmer be fired? Is it win or go home for his coaching tenure in Minnesota? If he doesn't win this game, is he done? And you wonder how much that throw by Kirk Cousins to Adam Thielen in overtime, for as awesome as it was and how great that was at the time, for us as fans to beat the Saints of all teams in their building, that now you're stuck with Kirk for 3 years on a massive contract. You just extended Mike Zimmer, and you're 1-5, and no improvement in sight on that. It's just a way to think about that game in a not so fun light. Even though at the time it was really fun to be a part of, it seems like that could be in the long haul detrimental overall.
Yeah, I mean, if your ultimate goal as a fan is to win a Super Bowl and not just have a bunch of kind of sporadic fun moments, right? Like, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Last postseason, beating the Saints on a walk-off winner, amazing moment, right? But like, is that moment plus like another playoff victory, maybe a run to the NFC Championship? Is that all worth the one
you
Super
wonder
Bowl
too,
moment?
Like, if the Vikings don't extend Kirk Cousins, I bet Stephon Diggs is still a Viking, and so you have that angle on things too, where I don't think it's a coincidence that one day, we got Kirk Cousins has been extended by the Minnesota Vikings, very next day, Stephon Diggs has been traded to the Buffalo Bills, so I don't think that's a coincidence, and I'm not saying that this is for sure Diggs would still be a Viking right now if all this didn't happen, but there's a lot of that domino effect that took place, where if the Vikings lose that game, perhaps Zimmer is on the final year of his contract and this start happens. Perhaps Kirk is on the last year of his deal, and the Vikings can easily get out of it, and all of a sudden, this future that the Vikings have, where there's a bunch of young, talented pieces in place,
right,
a bunch of studs and stars that can get out of that, or get out of the quarterback and head coach situation easily and quickly and turn that over without wasting any more of the primes of Harrison Smith and Eric Kendricks and Danielle Hunter and all those blue chip players that you mentioned. But I don't know. That's a very dark way to look at this right now. But there's not a bright way to look at what the Vikings are dealing with right now.
You're absolutely right. There is no bright way to look at this, and that's why we're speaking the truth. This is what I'm not under the impression that my views and your views right now are any different than anyone else in Minnesota. It's just the objective truth. The Vikings suck ass. I'm sorry. That's what it is right now. And the ultimate question then is like, okay, how do you fix it, right? Now, neither of us claim to have all the answers, but the people that are getting paid for it better start coming forward with some answers, or they're going to be out of job. Because this is a real problem right here for Vikings fans. This is your ultimate third world problem right now. In the middle of a pandemic, the Vikings are a terrible football team, and our goal is to try to figure out how to fix it. And unfortunately, I just don't know. Like I've never been more like kind of swayed by performance than I have this season. And maybe I'm right. I'm starting to think that Stephon Diggs was ahead of the curve. I used to think that.
I 100% believe that.
I used to think he was being dramatic. I still like the guy. I love the dude. You guys know that. But I still thought he was being dramatic. Now I think he was just right. He was just right. And I think
we always knew he was right about
we're going to find
out. We always
out.
knew he was right in that he should have been getting targeted more. But
right.
There was a rumored vendetta against Kirk. We don't know if that was true or not or what, but he knew when to get out. And now he's on Buffalo, and I think he's among the league leaders in receiving yards right now. And
not just receiving.
And so he's clearly he knows what he's doing for his career, and I have nothing else to add. We didn't talk much actually about the actual game because, that starts with Kirk mistakes and then it's just garbage time from there. But I will say, Justin Jefferson, I'm going to be like, I saw Luke Braun say this on Twitter. Vikings are going to Andre Johnson this, where Justin Jefferson is going to be awesome for the rookie contract, and the Vikings are going to stink the whole time. Andre Johnson.
I mean, I don't hate it. I hope that's not the case.
About Calvin Johnson too, but he was just awesome and like legendary the whole time. But I don't know. It's wild. Kirk Cousins has turned into Jameis Winston. Vikings they're going to be bad for a while because of the way these contracts and the gamble that the Vikings have made. Kind of a gamble. It was not even a gamble. It's weird because the fork in the road thing. They didn't pick a path, and so it's just they have no plan for a 1-5 start. Like that was not in the cards for them, and suddenly it just showed up, and now they have no idea what to do with it.
Again, that's just another example of something that, like, the general manager has to foresee coming. And I'm not saying any of us saw this coming, right? I didn't think the Vikings were going to be 1-5. We did our season standings projections. I didn't see this coming. But, like, if you're a general manager, you either A, need to see it have a plan on what to do. Yeah. So now we have the opportunity now for Rick Spielman to see what that plan looks like for the rest of this game. For the rest of the season. I mean, you've played 6 games. There's 10 of them left. You got to win 9 of them postseason. That's not going to happen. So what is plan B? That's kind of, to me, Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman have the opportunity here for the rest of this year. And really, this is the focus of the entire campaign for the rest of 2020 is the direction that Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman taking the Vikings right now, is it the right direction to get us to where we want to go as fans? They're auditioning for their jobs right now, despite the fact that they have, contract security. They don't have emotional security right now. I don't think the Wilfs are afraid of firing a coach that they don't think is right for it. I don't think they're scared of firing a football executive that they don't believe is right for the direction. These two guys are controlling what they're going to do in this situation that they put themselves in. So the question becomes, all right, can you dig yourself out of your own mess, or do we have to go find someone else to do it? That's the question here. That's what we're going to be watching for the rest of this year because, again, I mean, if you guys have some positives, feel free to throw them at me. But other than Justin Jefferson, I mean, even the Dalvin Cook contract looks stupid right now because we just saw this team fall apart when he wasn't playing. And we said this before the season. You can't pay a guy if he's not going to play. You can't throw all of your eggs into 2 pieces. Kirk Cousins, who throws interceptions, Dalvin Cook, who's always injured.
You can't use this game. You can't use this game to validate, like, oh, look at how the Vikings did without Dalvin Cook. He's that valuable. He didn't play. He was hurt. Like, that's part of what you pay a player to do is play the game. If they can't play, like Alexander Madison contributed more to that game than Dalvin Cook did. That is a fact. There's clear evidence of that. You know why? Because Dalvin was hurt. I don't want to pay a running back $63 million because he's going to be hurt multiple games a year.
Everything looks bad right now. And I guess that's probably a good place to put it, to end this show. Everything looks bad right now.
Let's stop talking.
All right, folks. Well, thank you for venting with us or listening to us vent, I suppose. You can continue to find the show on Daily Norseman. Make sure to check out the rest of the Climbing the Pocket Network on there as well. For our listeners, you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and everywhere else where podcasts can be found. And, of course, Drew and I are on YouTube as well if you prefer to watch the show. So we will be back later on this week previewing another game. And as always, thank you for listening.